MMA Now, powered by Film On TV Networks.
I'm David Kano with Film On TV Networks, MMA Now, and right now we're joined with Yahoo Sports Radio, Matt Perrault, who's joining us live from Las Vegas, Nevada. You're actually, for the first time, on our new big screen TV in here, so people will see you live and in action right here. How's the weather right now in Vegas? I know it was raining last week, but how is it right now?
I've actually had a pretty nice stretch here of 75 to 80-degree days. So in late May, we'll take that. It could be up to 105 by now. So we'll take the 70s and the 80s for now, and the summertime heat's coming for sure.
I actually like the 100-degree nighttime weather in Vegas. I don't know if that's weird or not, but when I go out there, maybe it's because I don't have to be there all the time.
Yeah, you don't have to be here when it's that brutally hot. But I have not experienced 105 at night yet, but I have seen the 90s. So it makes for fun pool parties. I mean, you can do it all night.
Right. Well, let's get right into it because I've been asked this all the time via Twitter, via social media. How do you get started in sports broadcasting? How have you got into it? And I have a far different experience than you, I'm sure. Obviously, have a degree. And can you really talk about? Let's talk through your career. Where did you start out? Do you have a degree? How did you get started in the business?
Sure. I got a degree from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and I graduated in 1999. And my first job out of college was to be the play-by-play voice of the University of Virginia women's basketball team. But one of the things I did in college, and this is what I always tell people, is that, you have to understand when you go to school, try to have a ballpark idea of what you want to do. So I knew I wanted to do mass media. I just didn't know really what. I thought I might go into music. I thought I might go into television or print. I didn't know. And I kind of tried on every hat that I could do while I was in college. And in conjunction with that is that I was the sports director of my college station. And part of that was a lot of, the business side of things and learning how to generate revenue and how to turn this, not just into I take, but what do I bring to the table to help my employer grow his business. And so I knocked on doors and I sold $5 commercials and I did a lot of crazy things in college that let me get my first job where maybe I wasn't the best broadcaster, maybe I wasn't the best play-by-play guy, but I knew how to get out there and hustle and make money for my employer. And thus I got hired and was brought down to Virginia, spent a year in Charlottesville, and then realized that I wanted to be on the air every day. And I was kind of lucky because talk radio was starting to kind of grow, and sports talk radio in particular was beginning to really blossom. And I answered an ad in, of all places, Huntsville, Alabama. And so this Boston kid went to Bama for 5 years. I call it radio boot camp. I spent time underneath.
Well, okay, what year was that?
That was from 2001 to 2005, so early '01 to late '05. And the man who hired me started the career of Sean Hannity, and he basically just drilled in everything with radio in terms of from on-air to business to promotions to marketing to do everything that I do now for Yahoo Sports Radio. So from there, the career kind of bounced around. I've been all over the country. I've been in Nebraska, in Iowa, in New Hampshire, in Boston, Virginia, Alabama, and now Nevada. So I've been everywhere. Radio has been a really fun ride, but I learned early on how to make myself an asset versus someone who just has to get paid for what I do in radio.
Now, Southern California, that's where we're based out of. That's where I've been based out of practically my whole life. It's a different out here than any other small town or even mid-tier city. Out here, talk radio, it's obviously people in the cars listening to radio, but it changed around 2007, 2008, where the internet had this explosion. And one of the guys that helped me get my start on the MMA side, not on the film side, was Joe Grande. I mean, he was like top 5 on LA in the radio, and then he went from being, on Ryan Seacrest's show on air, having his own show, and then no more. So, can you talk us through why are the bigger markets more susceptible due to the? Do you attribute that to the internet and people wanting to just get a quick podcast or a quick fix that way?
No, I think what has happened in radio with a lot of people is that the revenue generated versus the amount of money needed to pay talent has become a little bit out of whack. And in a lot of ways, the larger markets are the most susceptible for that, because when you're into the larger markets, you're dealing with gigantic ad buys, and you're dealing with clients and sponsors that have to come in and give a tremendous amount of money to keep shows and keep stations alive. I mean, I always tell people, sports talk radio is a cash machine. If you weren't making a ton of money at it, then you're not doing it right. And a lot of that became, well, if I'm generating X for the company, then I should be getting Y for compensation. And thus you have egos and agents that come into play. And, sports talk radio is a little bit different than top 40 radio because it's a 25 to 54 male demographic. It's a little more of a targeted ad buy versus like Ryan Seacrest, who is just going to get the biggest and largest audience because he's got the most appeal, and thus the biggest advertisers come calling. But if Ryan Seacrest doesn't have, as many advertisers as has been budgeted, or if you go through a downturn in the economy, all of a sudden the secondary person or the third chair, fourth chair person that might be making six figures becomes expendable. And that really happens a lot in large markets because they invest heavily in big shows, and thus you have 3 or 4 or 5 people on a show, and then the station has to trim. So unfortunately, the big stars tend to have their contract guaranteed, but the guys who are around, the secondary and third guys who are trying to kind of not ride the coattails, but add something else that's not maybe the number one guy, can sometimes find themselves on the street pretty quick.
And do you think that's because of, let me just get this straight, do you think that's because those second level guys are not, the ads and the sponsors coming in aren't able to pay their budgets, their salaries?
Yeah, you aren't buying Ryan Seacrest for somebody else other than Ryan Seacrest. So you aren't necessarily looking at, from an ad perspective, the show doesn't change dramatically unless Ryan Seacrest isn't on it. So from a sports talk standpoint, as long as you have the 2 main guys who are on there, you may have 3 producers on a major market show. But if things aren't going well, it turns into 2 producers or 1 producer. Some major market shows don't even have a full-time producer. I mean, it's amazing how the industry has changed. And it's not so much about the internet, and the internet has been, I look at it as an added value. It's a tool. It brings more eyeballs, more ears, more people to talk radio, and gives us more as talent, more opportunities to get out there and utilize that, that number of people who are going to come and follow. But content's king. I mean, that's the key. It's a name of the game. And there are a lot of companies still trying to figure out, okay, if I have 10,000 followers on Twitter, why am I not having, 10,000 listens on a podcast? And it's just not really like that right now. And there's so many different avenues and so many different ways of getting your content out. It is a crowded marketplace, but the ones that are the best, the ones that are the most entertaining, are still the ones that get the most eyeballs and the most ears.
But let's talk about the social media side. I feel like this has been a whole game changer along with, for me, myself, I think the internet has totally changed the game, where you have people that don't have degrees like us or haven't paid their dues, so to say, that are able to flourish because of something silly they've done. Do you not see it that way?
I do, but I'm not worried about that person. I mean, I'm not concerned about somebody who might, get a microphone and get a recorder and start talking, because that's where credibility comes in. That's where finding, at least from in our industry in sports, it comes from the experiences and the connections and the people that you talk to, the interviews that you've conducted, the people that you can talk to about what's going on. And certain people won't talk to you because if you're just Joe Blow guy in a basement, you're not going to get somebody to come on who's a major market media member, or someone who's from a sports team, or from the UFC, or from boxing. It's just not going to happen for you, and you have to establish credibility. Now eventually you may get there, and there are people who have proven you can do that, but if you don't pay your dues and you don't get yourself the experience that you need to be successful, then I'm not really worried about that person. I'm more worried about somebody like a Bill Simmons, who is going to go from ESPN into HBO into podcasting, and all of a sudden Bill Simmons is his own company. I mean, that's the game changers, when someone who's that large all of a sudden commands a ton of media and has his own brand and can go ahead and change what everyone's doing. That's where you have to keep up, and that's where things really start to change, is when those big whales are able to go off on their own and establish themselves, like a Dan Patrick when he left ESPN. When they get big enough, that really does change the game when they get out there on their own.
Matt Perrault from Yahoo Sports Radio on right now with us, MMA Now TV. Well, how do you think podcasts have affected the radio, or on the positive side and the negative side?
The positive side, I think it's amazing that we can say whatever we want. We can curse and swear and do whatever we want. I think the content side of podcasting is amazing because it enables you to talk about things that you would never talk about. Like hypothetically, on my show, the NHL is really not that big of a deal nationally. Okay, in certain markets it is, but in other markets, across the country, if I'm airing in say a market like here in Las Vegas, who might get an NHL team in a couple of years, but for the most part, the NHL is not that large here. So if someone's listening to my show on our affiliate here in Las Vegas, and I'm doing an hour on the NHL, that's going to be pretty boring. People aren't going to enjoy that. But if you were a diehard NHL fan and you did a podcast, you could live in Vegas and have listeners in Canada and have people who love the NHL and who love hockey who want to listen to you. So on that, there's the benefit. The negative is that you're right. In terms of advertisers, there is so many people out there doing it that they don't understand yet how to buy it. Nobody does. Everyone's still trying to figure out the way to monetize. How do you make money off a podcast? Even those with big, huge numbers are still struggling. I mean, I mentioned Bill Simmons. He's not selling out his podcast. He's doing good, doing well, but he's not making millions on his podcast, even though he's averaging like 500,000 listens every time he puts one up. So we're still in the infancy as to where we're going. And ultimately, look, people don't like to hear this, but the media is there to make money. Okay. And if you aren't making money, you aren't doing it. You aren't being paid to do it, or you aren't doing it yourself because your time is valuable. We don't know how to, the whole internet game is from print to radio to TV. We are all still in the early stages as to how the heck we're going to do this in the next 10 to 20 years.
Well, from what I've heard from the Joe Rogan podcast, I mean, I think he's top 3 right now. A pretty credible figure that was thrown out with his sponsors was around the 800,000 per month mark. Do you think that's a credible source?
Sure. I mean, it all comes down to a term that I don't want to get really wonky here, but cost per thousand, and how much is an advertiser paying for every 1,000 people that click and listen, and then there's the whole thing of like how long are people listening to it, and are they listening to the entire thing, and there's pre-roll and mid-roll, there's all these different things from a monetary standpoint. And sure, if you have an extraordinarily successful podcast, it will make a lot of money for you. The problem is that so many people hear that number and see Joe Rogan or see Bill Simmons and they go, oh, I can do that. And they start going ahead and trying to create a podcast. And then you've got 8,000 podcasts on iTunes. And I think on my iPhone, I have like 15 podcasts that automatically download whenever they get posted. And I think I listen to 2 of them. I don't get through all of them, but they get downloaded. So they get counted as a download. So that's part of the problem. Is it, am I actually listening to it, or am I just downloading it? So we're still in a very gray area as to how we're doing this. At least in radio, there is a way of tracking how someone is actively listening to your program.
What 2 podcasts are those?
That I listen to?
Yes.
I love Nolan. I think Katie Nolan is an absolute superstar. Whenever she has a podcast, I'll listen to it. And then Bill Simmons is, I'm from Boston, so Bill Simmons is kind of the gold standard. So those are the 2 that when they do upload, I listen. But I've got a million other ones that will pop up that I'll be like, okay, maybe if I'm driving and I have time, I'll listen to it. But it's a really crowded marketplace for sure.
Well, let's before we get into some real talk, some sports talk. I want to get into salaries. I know a lot of people are always curious, like, what do you make? I mean, obviously, I don't disclose that. You probably would not disclose yours. But from a standpoint of, I know what those second tier guys were making in LA was around $250,000 to $300,000 a year. And then you have like the big boys, the Ryan Seacrest, they're making, a couple million, whatever, per year. What are people making across in radio right now? Because there's not that mid-tier guy anymore. What salaries have you come across lately?
Well, look, I mean, again, it comes down to where you are and how much of an audience are you commanding and how much of a market share are you commanding. Because, in a market like New York, if you're a Mike Francesa, you're demanding $6, $7, $8 million a year. That's not outrageous. If you're in Chicago and you're doing extraordinarily well in Chicago, in sports talk radio, you're going to make a couple $1 million a year. And then if you're national, you can make even more than that, depending on what network you're on and how much money you're making. I mean, no one knows how much Dan Patrick is making, but it's a lot. I mean, Dan is extraordinarily well syndicated, and he has built a company for himself, so he's not paying other people. Dan's making it himself, so that's an extraordinary opportunity, and he employs his own people, and he's got a large chunk of his syndication deal. So the money is there, but it's a lot of hard work for those people, and they've paid their dues, and they've built up an audience. And one of the things that I always say to young people when they talk to me about, well, I want to get into the industry, I always say, what separates you and what makes you different? And so for me, I'm the first to tell you that I love what I do. I love my show. I love what I'm able to accomplish. But I also love the fact that I'm able to do business here in Vegas and nationally with Yahoo Sports Radio. It makes me a little bit different because I look at the whole business side of this industry, and I try to go on both sides. I don't ever want to be attached or detached from how my show is doing or who is sponsoring my show or promotions we can do. And I'm heavily involved with an event we're doing coming up in July here in Vegas for Chris Paul. He's doing his ping pong tournament here, and I'm heavily involved in the planning stages and the marketing stages of that event. And that's got nothing to do with my show, but it's my relationship and connection to the Palazzo Casino here in Las Vegas that Chris is doing it with, that I'm able to be a part of that. So I'm lucky that I recognized that pretty early, like my junior year in college, that this is going to be a crowded marketplace. How do I separate myself? And that's how I separate myself. Now, other people do it differently, but that's my recommendation to anybody trying to get into this industry. How are you different? And then go and try to utilize that to the best of your ability.
Now, as far as 5 years, 10 years down the road, where do you see radio 5, 10 years?
Well, it really comes down to what the FCC is going to do and then what the automakers are going to do, which is kind of a crazy statement. But radio being such a car-driven medium, that if the automakers decide that they're going to essentially make your car dashboard a computer, and you can auto-download podcasts, and you can go ahead and stream whatever station you want, radio will change dramatically because we will no longer need towers. But if we don't need towers, that means we don't need the FCC. If we don't need the FCC, that means we can say whatever we want, and all of a sudden radio becomes like the internet, and it's just whatever you want to say, and there's no curse word problems, and there's no content questions. You can do whatever you want. So that would be a very interesting world, because there's no way that Disney and ESPN, probably even Fox, are going to allow a Howard Stern type radio show. But they may have to, because to be competitive, to be able to allow it to happen, and to keep the eyeballs in the ears, you may need to do things like that. So the answer to the question is, I don't know, because if automakers say, okay, we are going to completely outfit these cars, every car standard is going to have the ability in dash to download podcasts and download streaming audio, we're into a new world, and radio will change really quickly. For the better, I don't know. It's a great question, because you do run into more problems when you're talking about, are cities going to Wi-Fi out? Are they going to have towers? What do you do when you're in the middle of nowhere? It won't be like we have to all be on satellite type radio, or will we do something else? So it's an evolving answer. I don't know the exact answer as to where we'll be, but it's changing really fast in radio.
Matt Perrault, Yahoo Sports Radio, on the TV, MMA Now TV, Film on TV network. Matt, what is if you had to give one piece, maybe two pieces of advice to someone that's looking to break into the industry, what would that be?
Intern. I know it stinks. I know no one likes to work for free, but if you can find your way into an organization where you will do anything and everything for them, when a job opens, when a small position, is a crack in the door and you can force your foot in there, that's the way to break into this industry. I interned literally in every medium. I interned at a TV station, at a newspaper, I did obviously a lot of radio stuff. I interned at a station that's now defunct in Boston called WFNX, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I worked underneath the music director, and after 4 months of working with her, she sat down and said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I kind of explained to her, and she said, "Don't do this," because she knew where radio was going. She said, "Look, in 10 years, music radio is going to be totally different," and she was 100% right. Music radio, she foresaw, the MP3 coming and podcasts and all the other things that were going to happen for radio. And we've seen syndication. DJs are, really struggling to find music jobs and everything else. So it was a great piece of advice, and kind of answered the question for me: is it sports? Is it music? Well, it was going to be with sports, because she quickly said, "Don't do that." So I would get into the industry that you want to get into, find those people. And then my other piece of advice would be to network your tail off. Send emails to anyone and everyone you find to be interesting, you want to emulate, you want to look up to, because 80% of the time they're going to be really nice. They'll respond to you. They may not do exactly what you want. Like if you ask them, "Hey, listen to my show," okay, they might not. But if you send them a piece of audio, you send them a piece of video, you might say, "Hey, look, could you watch this or listen to this for me and tell me what you think?" And the majority of time people will do that, because that's how we all got our start. And the next generation coming up, we it's great to see talented young people who are hungry.
It's funny you say intern. We actually brought on an intern, Tyler Irvin, here about a week and a half ago. And I feel it's really hard to find some young people, they just want it right now. They don't want to be able to learn the ropes. And to be able to find someone that's good, especially in a big city like LA, is unique. So I think that's probably one of the best pieces of advice that I could think of.
It's funny because I'm 39, but my mom, I have kind of a modern family, and my mother got remarried, and I have two brothers in their early 20s and one sister who's going to be a senior in high school coming up next year, and or junior now. And I try telling them the exact same thing, because I look at their friends and I look at a lot of young people that we even have at Yahoo Sports Radio. And you're absolutely right. And I hate to sound like the old crotchety guy on the porch yelling about the youngsters, but a lot of young kids, and maybe it's the millennials, or I don't know, it's a different generation, but a lot of them don't want to get their hands dirty. A lot of them want the success very quickly, and they don't want to get into the nuts and the bolts of actually having to go and work hard. And look, I lived in Virginia, Alabama, Omaha, Nebraska, Des Moines, Iowa. I mean, I wasn't just given a national radio show. Like, I had to, pay my dues and bounce around. I was the general manager of a station in Manchester, New Hampshire. I worked late nights on WEI in Boston on the weekends, and post Red Sox games at 2 a.m. And I did a lot of things to try to establish myself and work as hard as I could to impress those people that I wanted to impress, and show that I could handle as much opportunity as they could provide for me. And I tell people, look, are you willing to move? And they'll be in Boston or Chicago or New York, and they'll say no. And I'll say, well, you aren't just going to walk into a station in New York or Los Angeles. You just aren't going to walk into ESPN 710 and say, hey, hire me. Not going to happen. You aren't going to knock off, some major talent who's been invested with millions. It takes a long time. So if you want it, sacrifice is a really big part of our industry, unfortunately.
All right, before we get you out of here, we got Matt Perrault, Yahoo Sports Radio on. Let's talk a little bit of sports. When I came to your place at the Palazzo in Vegas, we made some predictions. We both were wrong on the Anthony Pettis. We both didn't see that coming. I wasn't happy with my Henry Cejudo pick, and that was on air, and obviously John Jones. But in light of everything, it's been the Conor McGregor show the past year. I mean, we're still talking about him right now, and it's just gotten bigger. Floyd Mayweather Jr., Money May, and Money Mac. Fox Sports' Colin Cowherd is calling that it will happen September 17th in Las Vegas at T-Mobile Arena. And you are disagreeing.
Colin Cowherd is my favorite sports talk show host, okay? In terms of someone that I think is an extraordinary mind, and I love listening to him. He is my go-to. I don't listen to a ton of sports talk radio because I don't like to have my opinions changed, but Colin is somebody that I listen to because I think every time I hear him speak. That was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard him come out and say, and the people that I've spoken to here in Vegas say he is going to be really wrong. And look, if he's right, he knows something that most people here in Vegas don't know. And Kevin Iole of Yahoo Sports, who's a good, I think one of the best in the industry, wrote a great piece. Who is sanctioning this fight? If we are going to see McGregor versus Mayweather, who is sanctioning this fight? Who in their right mind is going to allow Conor McGregor, who has never boxed in his life, to go up against a 49-0, arguably the greatest pound-for-pound fighter in the history of boxing, to get in the ring without MMA rules? He's going to get annihilated. And I know no one wants to think about that, but listen to Teddy Atlas, legendary trainer. Listen to numerous boxers who've been around here. No one's going to sanction this fight. They're not going to allow it to go off. And I agree with Kevin Iole on this. It's awesome to talk about. I wish it would happen. It's not going to happen, folks. It's just not going to happen.
I like it, Kevin Iole. I like him a lot. But then here's the thing: is it's Nevada. It's the Nevada State Athletic Commission. Anything can happen. I mean, they can always make an argument one way or the other. And in regards to it, who's going to promote it, it's not going to happen without a co-promotion. You have the Mayweather Promotions, and do you remember back to the old days where Pride and the UFC would do some cross promotion? If Dana White thinks this is going to make him and the company more money, you don't think? I'm not saying it's going to happen. I think it's not feasible.
McIntyre of Fox Sports tweeted something today that I found to be pretty interesting. And he said, Dana White is always talking. And after Colin came out with his report, Dana White hasn't talked. So it's a little strange that when Conor came out and said, I'm back on the UFC 200 card, Dana White quickly said, oh, no, you're not. So Colin comes out and says, McGregor Mayweather is in Vegas in September. Well, we didn't hear the UFC say, nope, that's not happening. So I don't know if they like the promotion or they like the extra attention they're getting from Conor here. And they're not worried about UFC 200, but they like the fact that they have everyone talking about him, even though he's not fighting in July here in Vegas. So maybe they're going to play it out for a little bit longer. But we haven't heard that, at least. We haven't heard that report shot down from yesterday as quickly as the UFC normally does when it comes to what happens if you're saying something's going to involve one of their fighters.
Exactly. I mean, the last we heard Dana White talk on it say, hey, Floyd, if you want to fight Conor, call me. I'm like, was a call made somewhere?
Honestly, and this is where I got to talk about this last night a little bit on my show. So Conor's line that Floyd needs me. Well, look, okay, I get where the game is going here, but Floyd is going to make $100 million really on whoever he fights. Conor's the one who's about to make a huge payday if he fights Mayweather. So the idea that Conor is the only opponent for Mayweather is a joke, because if Floyd wanted to fight Triple G, it would be huge. If he wanted to do Canelo Alvarez 2, it would be huge. So there are other opponents for Floyd. For Mayweather, but for McGregor, he doesn't want to fight at 145. We know that. Does he want to sit there and fight the winner of Edgar Aldo from 200? I don't know. I mean, he hates that cut. He doesn't want to go back to 145. He has the Diaz fight kind of sitting there. He lost that fight, so he gets to go fight Nate Diaz again, and I'm not so sure we're not going to see the same result if they fight it at 160 or 170. We'll probably see the same result we saw the first time around. So where's McGregor going? I mean, where Mayweather doesn't need McGregor. McGregor needs Mayweather, because all of a sudden he fights that, and it's relevant again, and he's back controlling his own destiny with the UFC and pushing the buttons. But he fights Diaz and loses again. Conor's leverage is gone in the UFC, and he will be forced to do whatever they tell him to do.
I don't think Floyd made $100 million against Andre Berto, but I agree, and I don't think he wants any part of Triple G. I think he would make $100 million off of that, but I think he said he doesn't want. He's too big, even though they're the same size essentially.
Floyd, why would you risk your last fight against someone who can straight knock you out? Now, the Canelo thing is interesting because he beat Canelo once before, so maybe he feels like, I understand Canelo Alvarez. I'm not afraid of Canelo Alvarez. I'll fight him again. But does Canelo Alvarez want to fight Floyd, or does he want to see if he can figure out a Triple G fight, or is it against somebody else who helps the money train going for Golden Boy Promotion? So the whole boxing angle to this thing, when Floyd is considering who he's going to fight next, he has multiple options to make big paydays. Not so for Mayweather. I'm sorry, for McGregor. He really has to do what UFC President Dana White tells him to do, and I don't know if Dana White wants to put his cash cow up against Floyd in a boxing match, which, let's be frank here, Floyd's at a major advantage in a fight with boxing rules.
If that fight ever was to be made, what's your prediction? How does that fight end?
Knockout, Mayweather third round.
Wow, knockout, really?
I think he would end up knocking out. I don't think he would be able. Put it this way, I'm not so sure. There are professional boxers, really talented guys that have a very tough time laying anything on Mayweather. I just don't see McGregor all of a sudden figuring out a way to hit Floyd. If they're fighting with boxing gloves and not 4-ounce MMA gloves, I just don't see Mayweather having much of a problem with McGregor. MMA rules, Floyd's dead. I mean, Conor would crush him in a round or two. But with boxing rules, no, I don't give McGregor much of a shot.
It's interesting. Summer is not officially here yet, but we're talking about two guys that don't have fights lined up: Floyd Money Mayweather and Conor McGregor. We thank you so much for coming on, Matt.
Guys, appreciate it.
That was Matt Perrault from Yahoo Sports Radio. Make sure you follow him at Sports Talk Matt. You can follow us at MMA Now TV.
MMA Now, powered by Phil on TV.